Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing something a little different. We're tackling a listener-submitted study guide all about the Renaissance. Think of it as like going back to school, but way more fun, right?
Absolutely. The Renaissance, it's not just about memorizing dates and names. It's about ideas that shaped the modern world. Art, science, politics, philosophy, you name it.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to be like your Renaissance tutors for the day. You've got the test. We've got well, not exactly the cheat sheet, but we'll help you make sense of those big Renaissance ideas.
Sounds good. Let's get started. What's the first question on the study guide?
Okay, question number one. What was the Renaissance? Simple, right? But maybe not so simple.
You got it. So the Renaissance was a rebirth of Western European society. And it was all fueled by this renewed interest in classical cultures like ancient Greece and Rome, their philosophy, art, literature, the whole shebang. It all came back in a big way.
Okay, so it was a rebirth. Cool. Now, question number two. What is humanism? And what were some of those humanist ideas and interests? Because that seems pretty key to understanding the whole thing, right?
Yeah, humanism was like the philosophical heart of the Renaissance. It was all about balancing religious ideas with, a focus on human experience and human potential. So humanists were really into celebrating human activity, dignity, all that. They were digging into the classics, promoting individualism, and even like exploring secularism.
So they weren't just copying the ancients, they were like building on those ideas.
Exactly. And it's interesting, they were still very much aware of Christianity, but they were trying to find that balance between faith and, a more human-centered worldview. They were kind of a mix of idealists and pragmatists, really.
Okay, I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
So on to question number three. How is Italy different from the rest of Europe during the late medieval period? And which city and family in Italy really helped get the Renaissance going?
Think of Europe at that time as like a patchwork quilt of kingdoms and empires, right? But Italy was different. It was more like this decentralized region of city-state republics. So like a bunch of mini countries, each with their own rulers and ways of doing things.
Ah, okay, so more independent, not one big power.
Right. And the city that really gets the credit for like kicking off the Renaissance is Florence. And the family that really drove it, the Medici family, they were powerful bankers, huge patrons of the arts and architecture.
Oh yeah, the Medicis, they were like the Renaissance's biggest investors, right?
Yeah,
Funding all the amazing art and buildings.
exactly. They were like the venture capitalists of the Renaissance, but for art.
Love it. Okay, question number four. What are the humanities? Give at least three examples of subjects that are humanities and one that's, not. Because I feel like that gets thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean?
Okay, so the humanities are basically all the subject areas that focus on, human activity in society. They help us understand how humans think, create, interact with the world. So some classic examples would be arts and literature, history and law, and oratory. Those all explore different aspects of the human experience, right?
Yeah, makes sense. So, like, trying to understand people and societies, what would be an example of something that's not a humanity?
Math or science, for example. They're super important, obviously, but they tend to focus on, the natural world and its laws rather than human behavior and society.
Got it. Okay, moving on to question number five, and this one's a big one. Complete the chart below with the correct people. There's a whole list of names here. Let's start with Marco Polo. Now, everyone knows Marco Polo, but refresh my memory. What's he famous for?
Oh, Marco Polo. He was that Italian merchant who traveled all the way to Asia, like way back in the day. He served the Mongols, hung out in China, and when he finally came back to Italy, he wrote all about his adventures. Imagine the stories he had.
Yeah, that's some serious wanderlust. Okay, what about Petrarch? That name rings a bell, but
Petrarch was an Italian scholar and writer. He was obsessed with the classics, studied authors like Cicero, and he's often called the father of humanism. His writings were super influential in spreading those humanist ideas all over Europe.
okay, yeah, that makes sense. Next on the list is Cosimo de' Medici. We already talked about the Medici family, but what was special about Cosimo?
Well, Cosimo was a Florentine banker, obviously, but he was also a major patron of the arts. He was like the go-to guy if you were an artist or an architect with a big idea. He funded so many of the iconic Renaissance projects.
Okay, so we've covered the big picture stuff, but now let's talk about the artists. First up, Brunelleschi. He was an architect, right?
That's right. Brunelleschi was a super innovative Italian architect. He actually invented perspective, the thing that makes paintings and sculptures look three-dimensional and realistic.
Oh, yeah, like those paintings where you feel like you could just walk right into the scene.
Exactly. And he was also a big fan of bringing back classical structures like domes, columns, arches, all that stuff. He really helped give the Renaissance that grand monumental look.
So, like, those buildings that just make you feel tiny, that's
Yeah.
Brunelleschi. Okay, next up is Donatello.
Donatello was another early Renaissance Italian artist, but he was a sculptor. He was famous for his sculptures, especially his Bronze David. It was like revolutionary for the time because it was so incredibly realistic.
I've seen pictures.
Yeah.
Very impressive. Next up, we have Michelangelo. I mean, come on, Michelangelo.
Oh, Michelangelo. He was like the rock star of the Renaissance, the ultimate artist. Sculptor, painter, architect, he did it all. The Marble David, the Pietà, the Moses sculpture, the frescoes in the Sistine Chapel. I mean, the guy was a legend.
Yeah, and they're not even kidding when they say Renaissance man, right? He was the definition of that.
For sure. And speaking of Renaissance men, we can't forget Leonardo.
Leonardo da Vinci, the original Renaissance man. Painter, sculptor, inventor, scientist, the list goes on.
Right. Like, how did he even have time to sleep? He's the guy who gave us the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, but he was also a genius with sketches, like the Vitruvian Man, exploring human proportions and anatomy.
So he wasn't just an amazing artist, he was like a scientist and engineer too.
Exactly. He was fascinated by, like, everything.
Okay, who else is on our list of Renaissance superstars?
Next up, we have Botticelli, another Italian artist known for his paintings that really celebrated the beauty of the human form. The Birth of Venus, La Primavera, Adoration of the Magi, those are some of his most famous works.
Beautiful paintings, for sure. Let's see, who's next? Raphael.
Raphael. He was a high Renaissance Italian artist, and he gave us masterpieces like The School of Athens and The Wedding of the Virgin. His work really captured that Renaissance ideal of beauty and harmony.
Yeah, I remember studying those paintings. Very impressive. Okay, who else do we have?
Dürer. Dürer was a major figure in the Northern Renaissance. He's famous for his incredible paintings like Adoration of the Magi and his engravings like Night, Death, and the Devil. Northern Renaissance art, like we talked about, often had a darker, more intense feel compared to the Italian Renaissance.
Right, more symbolism and hidden meanings.
Right, exactly. Okay, moving on. Next up, back to Italy, we have Dante, the author of the Divine Comedy. It's this epic poem, a journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven.
Intense. Okay, what about Machiavelli? Now, his name always comes up when people talk about, like, power and politics, right?
Oh, yeah. Machiavelli was a fascinating figure. He wrote The Prince, which is basically a guidebook for rulers. But it's pretty controversial because it really emphasizes pragmatism over ethics. Like, do whatever it takes to stay in power, even if it means being ruthless.
Wow, so not exactly playing by the rules. Okay, who's our last Renaissance superstar?
Well, we'll finish off with Cervantes, a Spanish author who wrote Don Quixote. It's a satirical novel that kind of makes fun of those medieval ideas about chivalry. And, of course, no discussion of the Renaissance would be complete without Shakespeare, the English playwright. Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Julius Caesar. His plays are still so powerful even today.
Yeah, they really explore the human condition in a way that, like, transcends time,
Yeah,
correct?
totally. So are you ready for question number 6? This one looks like a chart comparing medieval Europe and Renaissance Europe.
Hit me with it. I'm ready for more.
All right, so let's look at the art themes row. Medieval art was primarily focused on, Christianity, deaths, chivalry, sometimes violence. Renaissance art still embraced Christianity, but it also drew a lot from classical culture. So you see those themes from Greek and Roman history, mythology, all that stuff.
So Renaissance art was more of a blend, like taking the old and mixing it with the new.
Yeah, exactly. And that shift is also reflected in how people were depicted in art. Medieval art, the figures were often like unrealistic, expressionless. Renaissance art was all about realism, celebrating the beauty of the human body, capturing all those different emotions.
Yeah, I can definitely see that difference in the art I've seen. What about the art scenery row? How did that change?
Well, in medieval art, you often see this unrealistic two-dimensional scenery. Renaissance artists, they really mastered perspective. They could create these realistic three-dimensional spaces, and that made the art feel so much more immersive.
It's amazing how much of a difference that makes, just being able to create that sense of depth.
Right. It completely changes how you experience the art. Okay, let's talk about architecture. So medieval architecture is known for its Gothic and Romanesque styles, all those pointed arches and soaring structures. Renaissance architecture, they went back to the classics: domes, columns, arches, those rounded shapes.
So curves were back in style.
You could say that. The Renaissance was all about, harmony and balance. And that brings us to literature. Medieval literature was often focused on religion and philosophy, and it was mostly written in Latin and Greek. But the Renaissance saw the rise of novels, plays, satire, and a lot of it was exploring secular themes, alongside those religious and philosophical ones. And most importantly, they were written in the vernacular, the languages that people actually spoke.
So more accessible to everyday people.
Exactly. It was all about expanding horizons. All right, ready for question number 7? This one asks, what were the differences between the Northern Renaissance and the Italian Renaissance, and how did their art differ? We touched on this a bit earlier, but let's dive in.
Sure. So the Northern Renaissance, while it shared a lot of the core values with the Italian Renaissance, it really emphasized Christianity, like even more so. And they weren't as focused on the classical themes.
Right, it was like their own unique take on the Renaissance, and how
Yeah.
did that show up in their art? Their art often had this darker, more intense feel. They were really into exploring religious themes, death, morality, all that. And they loved symbolism. There were often hidden messages and symbols in their work.
So it's like they were inviting you to like really think about the deeper meaning behind the image.
Exactly. They were all about making you think. Okay, on to the last question. Question number 8. Label each location on the map. Looks like a geography quiz.
Let's do it. I think I remember my European geography.
All right, first up, we've got Genoa, a busy port city on the Italian coast. Then there's Milan, another important city in northern Italy, known for its commerce and culture. Next is Venice, the city of canals, famous for its trade and maritime power.
Oh yeah, Venice.
It's-
Super romantic.
Definitely. Okay, then of course we can't forget Florence, the birthplace of the Renaissance. And then there's Rome, the eternal city full of history and home to the Vatican. Finally, we have Naples, a vibrant city in southern Italy.
Okay, so that covers all the major Italian cities. What about those bodies of water?
All right, let's see. We have the Tyrrhenian Sea bordering the western coast of Italy. Then to the east, there's the Adriatic Sea. Down south, you've got the Ionian Sea. And of course, all of these are part of the Mediterranean Sea, which was super important for connecting all these different cultures during the Renaissance.
Wow, we just flew through all that geography. I feel like we covered so much ground today.
It's amazing how much we packed into this little study session, right?
It's like we traveled back in time and across Europe, all without leaving our seats.
It's incredible to think how influential this period was and how its ideas are still shaping our world today.
Yeah,